After his ex's betrayal, a billionaire takes his assistant on a trip, but only she can. He brought her as part of a plan, a discreet assistant to play a role in a quiet revenge. But all it took was one sunset in Napa Valley, one look that broke through their professional barrier, and something inside him began to crumble. She wasn't wealthy, she wasn't provocative, she wasn't trying to impress him, but that was precisely why he couldn't look away. And when her touch replaced the emptiness left by the woman who betrayed him, the billionaire realized that in the game he had started, she was the one who was winning. Sorry to interrupt your story, but if you enjoy this kind of content, don't forget to subscribe. Help this channel grow and we'll keep bringing you more stories. Thanks and enjoy. The skyscraper rose imposingly over Fifth Avenue, a glass giant, watching over the city that never sleeps. On the top floor, far from the bustle of Manhattan, Damien Altamirano stared at the Central Park skyline with absent eyes. At 35, he was one of America's most successful tech entrepreneurs, with a background rooted in a proud Mexican-American family, offices on 3 continents, and a fortune that grew by the second. But behind his amber-colored eyes hid a wound that money couldn't heal. The office, designed with minimalist elegance, reflected his state of mind: orderly, cold, functional. The white walls contrasted with dark wood and steel furniture. The only colors breaking the monotony came from the screens monitoring his companies around the world. "Mr. Altamirano, here are the contracts you requested." The soft voice of Valentina Guzman, his personal assistant for the past 3 years, interrupted his thoughts. She was like an efficient shadow, always there when he needed her, invisible when he required solitude. Damien turned slowly. "Thank you, Valentina." He watched the woman who met his gaze with unwavering professionalism for a moment. In a world where everyone wanted something from him, Valentina was an enigma. She never asked for anything personal, never tried to impress him, never showed any face other than that of absolute efficiency. Her black hair pulled back in a discreet bun, her elegant but sober attire, her precise movements, everything about her breathed control, a quality he had lost exactly 8 months ago when he found Isabel, his fiancée, in bed with his business partner. The betrayal had been twofold, and the pain unbearable. Since then, he had taken refuge in his work, building an invisible wall around himself. The man who had once laughed easily and trusted blindly now lived in an emotional self-exile. "Is there anything else you need?" Valentina asked, with that professional distance she maintained even after years of working together. Damien hesitated for a second. What he was about to say made no sense, not even to himself. "Yes, I need you to book 2 tickets to Napa Valley, first class, for this Friday." Valentina nodded, accustomed to his sudden business trips. "Shall I prepare a meeting schedule as well?" "There will be no meetings," he replied, turning back to the window. "It's a personal trip, and I want you to come with me." He could see the reflection of her surprise in the glass before she could hide it. "With you? But Mr. Altamirano, I need you to accompany me," he interrupted gently. 2 weeks. All expenses paid, of course, and you'll receive additional compensation." Valentina's dark eyes studied him, trying to decipher the motive behind the unexpected proposal. Damien knew it sounded strange. He had never mixed the personal with the professional before. "As you wish," she finally replied. "Is there a dress code I should be aware of?" A bitter smile formed on his face. "Yes, elegant. As if we were—" He paused, searching for the right words. "As if we were a couple." There it was. He had said it. The plan he had concocted after discovering that Isabel and Robert, his ex-partner, would be in Napa Valley that same week, celebrating their engagement. An engagement built on the ruins of his own. "I understand," Valentina said, her tone revealing neither judgment nor curiosity. "I'll take care of everything." When she left the office, Damien sank back into his thoughts. Did he really want to do this? Use his assistant as part of a game to prove he had moved on? It was childish, he knew, but sometimes pain turned men into wounded boys. What Damien didn't know was that, on the other side of the door, Valentina was clutching the folder to her chest. Her always composed face now showed a mix of conflicting emotions. Damien's proposal had come at the most unexpected and most necessary moment. That morning, before coming to the office, she had received a call from her family in Queens. Her brother Nicholas, just 17, needed a costly operation. Without adequate health insurance, the family had turned to her, the only one who had managed to make it and get a well-paying job. The additional compensation Damien offered could be the difference between life and death for Nicholas. As she walked to her desk, Valentina felt the weight of her secret. For 3 years, she had kept her personal life completely separate from her work. Damien knew nothing about her family in Queens, about her parents who ran a food truck every morning, about the brother she had promised to put through college. Now she would have to pretend to be something she wasn't, the romantic partner of one of the richest men in the country, a man who, despite their daily proximity, knew nothing about her. She dialed the travel agency with slightly trembling fingers. "Good morning. I need to book 2 first-class tickets to Napa Valley, California, under the names Damien Altamirano and Valentina Guzman." As she gave the details, her mind drifted to the lavender fields she had seen in pictures. She never would have imagined she would see them like this, faking a romance with her boss, keeping secrets, playing a role in a play she hadn't written. And Damien, from his glass tower of loneliness, also couldn't imagine that his assistant, the ever-efficient Valentina, had just as much at stake on this unexpected trip as he did. The black car moved along a road lined with cypress trees as Valentina watched, mesmerized, the fields of lavender that looked like violet oceans swaying in the wind. She had never seen anything like it, not even in the postcards her friend Rosie sent from her travels. The villa appeared around a bend, a golden stone building with terracotta roofs, surrounded by gardens that seemed to be lifted from an impressionist painting. Valentina held her breath. In her childhood, living in the small apartment in Queens, she had dreamed of places like this while flipping through old magazines. "We're here," Damien said, breaking the silence that had accompanied them for much of the drive. The driver stopped the vehicle in front of a stone entrance covered in bougainvillea. An older man, who introduced himself as Hector, the estate manager, welcomed them. "Mr. Altamirano, Miss Guzman, welcome to the Lavender Creek estate. If you'll allow me, I'll show you to your rooms." Valentina caught the fleeting glance Hector gave them, clearly assessing their relationship. She remembered then that she had a role to play. Naturally, she moved closer to Damien and took his arm. He tensed for a moment but didn't pull away. The villa was even more stunning inside. Polished terracotta floors, wooden beams on the ceilings, antique furniture coexisting harmoniously with modern pieces. Everything smelled of lavender and that indefinable scent of houses with history. "Your room, sir," Hector indicated, opening a door to a spacious suite with views of the vineyards. "And the Mrs. room is just across the hall." Valentina couldn't help but notice the physical distance Damien had established between them. Weren't they supposed to be pretending to be a couple? Perhaps he didn't want to take the charade too far. When she was alone in her room, decorated in shades of lavender and cream, Valentina allowed herself a moment of weakness. She sat on the bed, took out her phone, and looked at the latest photo her mother had sent. Nicholas in the hospital, trying to smile despite the pain. "I'm doing this for you, little brother," she thought, as she put the phone away and began to unpack. The following days passed in a strange routine. In the mornings they had breakfast on the terrace overlooking the lavender fields. Damien checked his emails while she read a book. Afterward, they would stroll through the grounds, where he insisted on having their picture taken together. In the vineyards, next to the ancient olive trees at the market in the nearby town, Valentina played her part perfectly. She smiled when necessary, posed for photos, walked arm in arm with Damien, as if they had been together for years. But she never tried to go beyond what was strictly required. She didn't ask personal questions, didn't invade his space when they weren't in public, didn't try to please him. This, surprisingly, began to intrigue Damien. On the 4th night, as they dined on the terrace under a star-strewn sky, Damien watched her with barely concealed curiosity. The local wine, a pale and fruity rosé, had slightly softened the atmosphere between them. "Are you always like this?" he asked suddenly. Valentina looked up from her plate. "Like what?" "So contained. You never complain, never ask for anything, never question." She smiled faintly. "It's my job, to be efficient and discreet." "But this isn't work," he countered, gesturing vaguely around them. "We're in one of the most beautiful regions in the country, at a villa that costs more per night than many people's monthly salary. You could show a little enthusiasm." Valentina set down her silverware and looked at him directly, something she rarely did. "Do you want me to fake enthusiasm too? I thought I only had to fake being your partner." The directness of her response seemed to leave him speechless. Damien took a sip of his wine, studying her over the rim of the glass. "No, I don't want you to fake anything else." he finally replied. In fact, it's refreshing. A cool breeze suddenly blew, flickering the candles on the table and making Valentina shiver. Without thinking, Damien stood up, took off his jacket, and placed it over her shoulders. His fingers brushed against the exposed skin of her neck for an instant. It was an automatic gesture, almost instinctive, the kind of courtesy his mother, a simple woman from Oaxaca, who had raised 3 children alone, had instilled in him before money and power changed everything. Neither of them commented on the moment. Damien returned to his seat, and they continued their dinner in silence. But something had changed. An invisible current, like the electricity before a storm, vibrated between them. That night, lying in his bed, Damien was surprised to find himself thinking about Valentina and not Isabel. He wondered what was going through his assistant's mind, what she truly felt about being there with him, participating in his petty revenge. Did she despise him for using people like this, or did she just see it as another job, an extension of her usual duties? Across the hall, Valentina lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The message she had just received from her mother said that Nicholas would need the operation sooner than expected. Time and money were running out. She wrapped herself tighter in the sheets, remembering the moment Damien had placed his jacket on her shoulders. The gesture had been so natural, so warm, so different from the cold, calculating man she knew. You can't afford to feel anything, she reminded herself sternly. You're only here to earn the money Nicholas needs, nothing more. But in the darkness of the room, with the scent of lavender floating in the air and the memory of Damien's touch on her skin, Valentina wondered how much longer she could maintain that barrier between what she had to do and what she was beginning to feel. And that scared her more than anything. The town of St. Helena was bustling with activity that market afternoon. Local artisans, cheese vendors, perfumers, and street artists filled the narrow, cobbled streets with colors and aromas that transported Valentina to the street markets in Queens she visited during her childhood. "Do you mind if we split up for an hour?" Damien asked after they had browsed the lavender stalls. "I have to take care of something. We can meet at that cafe." He pointed to a terrace under a striped awning. At 5, Valentina nodded, secretly relieved. Although they had found a certain comfort in their shared routine over the past few days, she cherished these moments of solitude where she didn't have to pretend. She wandered aimlessly through the side streets, occasionally stopping to admire shop windows. It was then that she saw it, a small antique-looking bookstore with used books stacked in wooden crates by the entrance. The sign, weathered by the sun, read, "The Painted Page." The interior smelled of old paper and that indefinable scent of old books that so reminded her of the library where she studied back in New York. Valentina browsed the shelves with reverence, her fingers brushing against the worn spines. To her surprise, she found a section of Latin American literature and pulled out a Spanish-language copy of Pedro Páramo. Juan Rulfo? An excellent choice. The woman running the bookstore smiled at her, speaking in perfect Spanish. "He's one of my favorites," Valentina replied, holding the book like a treasure. "I read it in high school and it changed my life." After paying for the book, she decided to sit on a small bench by the shop window, lost in the familiar opening pages. Through the glass she had a perfect view of the main street and the stone fountain that crowned it. That's when she saw her. A tall, slender blonde woman, styled like a runway model, walked confidently through the square. Her golden hair shone in the California sun, and her designer white dress contrasted with her tanned skin. Valentina recognized her instantly from the photos she had seen online when she researched her boss, Isabel Castellanos, Damien's ex-fiancée. As if summoned by a magnetic force, Damien appeared at that moment, coming out of a wine shop. He stopped dead in his tracks upon seeing Isabel, his face turning into an impenetrable mask that Valentina knew well. From her privileged position, Valentina could watch the scene unfold without being seen. Isabel approached Damien with a rehearsed smile. He remained motionless, like a marble statue. "I figured you'd be here," Isabel said, loud enough for Valentina to hear. "Robert mentioned you had booked the Lavender Creek estate." Damien looked like he wanted to walk away, but something kept him rooted to the spot. "What do you want, Isabel?" The blonde woman moved closer, invading his personal space like someone who knows the territory well. "To talk to you, of course. It's been months. I think I deserve at least that." Valentina watched as people passed by, oblivious to the drama unfolding. To the tourists and locals, they were just another couple arguing in the town square. We have nothing to talk about. Damien's voice was cold, sharp. I think you said everything you needed to say when I found you with Robert in our bed. Isabel had the decency to look ashamed, but she recovered quickly. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. I was confused, insecure. Her voice softened. I've missed you every day since. Damien let out a bitter laugh that Valentina had never heard from him before. Please, spare me the melodrama. You're engaged to him now, aren't you? I saw the pictures in the magazines. Isabel glanced at the fountain, as if looking for inspiration in the bubbling water. It's complicated. Robert is convenient, but he's not the one I love. Valentina felt an inexplicable pang in her chest. She closed the book, unable to continue pretending to read while witnessing that scene. I have to go, Damien said, taking a step back. Enjoy your stay in Napa. But before he could walk away, Isabel grabbed his arm. I still love you, Damien, she said with intensity. And I know you love me too. What we had doesn't just disappear. He gently but firmly removed her hand from his arm. Goodbye, Isabel. Valentina watched as Damien walked away with rigid steps, while Isabel remained by the fountain, watching him go. There was something in her expression, a mixture of determination and calculation, that unsettled Valentina. She waited until Isabel disappeared down a side street before leaving the bookstore. She walked to the cafe where they had agreed to meet, trying to process what she had just witnessed. Damien was already there, sitting at a secluded table, an untouched glass of red wine in front of him. His expression was somber, distant. Valentina sat down in silence, unsure of what to say. Find anything interesting? He asked, pointing to the book she was carrying. Juan Rulfo, she replied simply, showing him the cover. He nodded, recognizing the title, but his mind was clearly elsewhere. The drive back to the villa was uncomfortably silent. Back in the garden, as the sun began to set behind the hills, Damien finally spoke. You saw her, didn't you? Isabel. Valentina didn't try to pretend. Yes. I was in the bookstore when you spoke. Damien sighed, running a hand over his face wearily. She's the reason for this trip. I knew she'd be here with him. With Robert, my ex-partner. His voice took on a bitter edge. I wanted her to see me with someone else. To know I had moved on. The confession hung between them like the scent of lavender that surrounded them. I'm sorry, Valentina said sincerely. That must be difficult. The most pathetic part is that a piece of me wanted to see her suffer, Damien continued, surprising her with his honesty. But now, I feel nothing, not even anger. He paused. Nothing she says changes what she did. Valentina looked him in the eyes for the first time in a long while, really looking at him. I understand, she said softly, and she truly did. But she didn't tell him that she had seen a version of that story before, that her own father had left her mother for another woman, leaving her with 3 kids and a food truck as their only source of income. She didn't tell him that the secret reason that had brought her on this trip had a name, Nicholas, a face, her younger brothers, lying in a hospital bed, and an age, 17, far too young to be facing death. That night, as the Napa Valley sky filled with stars, 2 people shared the same roof and different silences, each carrying secrets that weighed more than all the stones of the old villa. The morning dawned perfectly, with the kind of golden light that photographers chase their entire lives. Damien had suggested a walk through the lavender fields, which the estate owner had said were at their most spectacular. Valentina dressed simply, jeans, a white cotton blouse, and a straw hat she had bought at the town market. When she came downstairs, she found Damien waiting for her in the foyer. For an instant, she thought she saw something different in his gaze, as if he were seeing her for the first time. You look different, he commented. It's just comfortable clothes, she replied, downplaying it. The air between them had shifted since the encounter with Isabel. It was as if an invisible barrier had cracked, allowing some light to filter through. They walked in silence along the path that wound through the vineyards until they reached the lavender fields. The landscape was breathtaking, miles of purple rose stretching to the bluish mountains on the horizon. The scent was intoxicating, and the buzzing of bees created a hypnotic soundtrack. Back in Queens, I never would have imagined a place like this, Valentina murmured, forgetting her usual reserve for a moment. Damien watched her with curiosity. Do you miss New York? The question took her by surprise. In 3 years of working together, it was the first time he had shown interest in her personal feelings. I miss my family, she answered honestly. The tacos al pastor from the food truck on our corner, the sound of the street vendors in the morning, even the traffic chaos. Damien smiled, a genuine smile he rarely showed. "My grandmother's chilaquiles," he said, joining in the nostalgia. "No one made them like she did." "Did?" Valentina asked, walking between the rows of lavender. "She passed away 5 years ago," he replied, his voice tinged with an affection she had never heard before. She was from a small town near Guadalajara, never learned to read, but she knew more about life than any university professor. Valentina wanted to ask more, hungry to know the man behind the mogul, but her foot caught on a root hidden among the plants. She fell forward with a stifled cry. The pain was immediate and sharp. Her ankle had twisted at an unnatural angle. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she held them back with dignity. "Valentina!" Damien knelt beside her, all reserve forgotten. "Are you okay?" She tried to stand, but the pain made her stumble. "I think I sprained my ankle," she said, biting her lower lip. Without a word, Damien slipped one arm under her knees and the other around her back, lifting her off the ground with a surprising ease. Valentina instinctively clung to his neck. "I can walk," she protested weakly. "We're half a mile from the villa," he replied, starting to walk with her in his arms. "Don't be stubborn." The warmth of his body against hers was disconcerting. She could feel his heartbeat, the rhythm of his breathing, the scent of his cologne mixed with the faint sweat from their walk. It was an intimacy she hadn't experienced with anyone in a long time. Damien walked in silence, his expression focused, as if performing a crucial task. Their eyes met briefly, and Valentina felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the pain. When they reached the villa, Hector greeted them with an alarmed expression. "Ms. Guzman, what happened?" "A silly accident," she replied as Damien gently placed her on a sofa in the main living area. "I just need to rest a bit." "Ice," Damien ordered. "And any painkillers in the house." Hector nodded and disappeared towards the kitchen. Valentina watched Damien, who suddenly seemed uncomfortable, as if he had just realized the intimacy of the moment they had shared. "Thank you," she said softly. He made a vague gesture with his hand, dismissing it. Anyone would have done the same. But they both knew that wasn't true. The Damien she knew in New York would have called for a medic or sent an employee to help her. He wouldn't have carried her in his arms personally, not with that almost reverent gentleness. After making sure she had ice and painkillers, Damien excused himself and went up to his room. Valentina remained on the sofa, her ankle elevated on a cushion, trying to ignore the lingering sensation of his arms around her body. As night fell, when she had managed to limp to her room and was getting ready for bed, there was a soft knock on her door. "Come in," she said, settling into bed. Damien entered, holding a small jar in his hand. "I found this in the first aid kit," he explained, showing her an ointment. "It's a natural anti-inflammatory. Hector says it's very effective." Before she could reply, he sat on the edge of the bed and opened the jar. The scent of herbs filled the room. "You don't have to do that," Valentina protested, suddenly conscious of her simple pajamas and loose hair. "I can apply it myself." But Damien was already kneeling beside the bed, taking her injured foot with surprising delicacy. His warm, strong fingers began to apply the ointment with circular motions. The contrast couldn't be greater. The powerful American entrepreneur who commanded tech empires and moved millions with a signature, kneeling before her, tending to her pain with reverent attention. "My grandmother always said that hands have healing power," he murmured without looking up. "That modern medicine has forgotten the value of the human touch." His fingers continued their gentle massage, moving beyond what was strictly necessary. Valentina held her breath, mesmerized by the moment. When Damien finally looked up, their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. His hand remained on her ankle, still but present, a point of contact that seemed to burn through her skin. Time seemed to stop. Neither spoke, neither moved. There was only their locked gazes and his hand on her skin. Finally, as if waking from a trance, Damien removed his hand and stood up. "You should rest," he said, his voice slightly hoarse. "You'll feel better tomorrow." And with that he left the room, leaving Valentina with her heart pounding and a certainty that terrified her. She was starting to feel something for him. As she turned off the lamp, she remembered the reason that had brought her to Napa. Her sick brother, the money she desperately needed. Falling for Damien Altamirano was not part of the plan. It would be a complication, a distraction, and likely a direct path to heartbreak. "It's just gratitude," she told herself in the darkness. "I'm just confused by his unexpected kindness." But deep down, Valentina knew she was lying to herself, and that lie could cost her more than a broken heart. The moon shone over the vineyards like a silver disk, casting bluish shadows on the villa's terrace. It was almost midnight and Damien couldn't sleep. The memory of Valentina, of her skin under his fingers, of the shared moment by her bed, swirled in his mind like a whirlwind. He had gone down to the kitchen for a glass of water when he heard her voice. Valentina was speaking in urgent whispers in the back garden. Through the open window, Damien could make out her silhouette, illuminated by the screen of her cell phone. He didn't mean to eavesdrop, but something in her tone, a fragility he had never heard in her, stopped him. "No, Mom, it's not possible to get the payment early," she was saying, her voice breaking slightly. "The agreement is to receive the compensation at the end of the trip." There was a pause as she listened. "What do you mean he's worse? What did the doctor say?" Another, longer pause. Damien could see Valentina bring a hand to her mouth, as if stifling a sob. "How much do they need for the deposit?" Her voice was now controlled, almost clinical. $50,000? Let me see what I can do. "No, I'm not going to ask him. I'll find another way." A silence fell, broken only by the chirping of crickets. "Tell Nico I love him, that he needs to hold on a little longer. I'm going to get that money, one way or another." Damien stepped back, feeling as if he had witnessed something far too intimate. He returned to his room, but sleep eluded him for hours. Who was Nico? Why did Valentina need money so urgently? And more importantly, why hadn't she asked him for help? The next morning, breakfast was unusually silent. Valentina had dark circles under her eyes and was constantly checking her phone. Damien watched her over his coffee cup, torn between respecting her privacy and a growing need to know the truth. "Your ankle seems better," he commented, trying to start a conversation. "Yes, the ointment worked well," she replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you." Damien took a breath. It was now or never. "Valentina, I overheard you on the phone last night." She looked up sharply, her full attention on him. "It wasn't intentional," he quickly clarified. "I came down for water and you were in the garden." Valentina's face became an impenetrable mask, the same one he had used for years to shield himself from the world. "You don't have to tell me anything," he continued in a soft voice, "but if you need something, anything—" She placed her cup on the table with a sharp click. Her knuckles were white from the tension. "I don't know what you heard," she said finally, "but those are personal matters that don't affect my work." "I'm not questioning your professionalism," Damien replied, surprised by her harshness. "I just want to help." Valentina stared at him for a long moment, as if weighing something in his eyes. Finally, she exhaled deeply. "My brother Nicholas is sick," she said, each word heavy as lead. "He has leukemia. He needs a specialized treatment that our insurance won't cover." Damien felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. "Why didn't you tell me?" Valentina's laugh was bitter, almost painful. "What was I supposed to say? Excuse me, boss, can I get a half-year salary advance to save my brother?" She shook her head. "I didn't want to seem like an opportunist. And then your offer for this trip came with the additional compensation." The pieces clicked into place in Damien's mind like a grim puzzle. The reason she had agreed to come with him had nothing to do with professional loyalty. It was pure necessity. "That's why you agreed to come," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "For the money." "Yes," Valentina admitted, without a trace of shame. "For the money that could save Nico's life." A heavy silence fell between them. The chirping of birds and the buzzing of bees in the garden now seemed surreal, too cheerful for the gravity of the moment. "How old is he?" Damien finally asked. 17, she replied, and for the first time Damien saw tears forming in her eyes. "He had a scholarship to study engineering next year. He's brilliant, much smarter than I am." Damien remembered the line he'd overheard the night before. "Tell Nico to hold on a little longer." The urgency of the situation hit him with full force. "I'm going to wire the money today," he said firmly. "Not as a loan, as an advance on the compensation we agreed on." Valentina shook her head. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity," he retorted with more harshness than he intended. "It's what's fair. I'm asking you to fake being my partner for some childish revenge while your brother is fighting for his life. I'm the one who should be ashamed." They looked into each other's eyes for what felt like an eternity. In Valentina's gaze, Damien saw something he had never noticed before. A deep pain mixed with a fierce determination, the kind of strength that only comes from fighting for someone else. "I'm sorry," he said finally, sincerely. I'm sorry for putting you in this position. I'm sorry for being so blind." A single tear rolled down Valentina's cheek. She quickly wiped it away, regaining her composure. "You had no way of knowing." Damien extended his hand across the table, not to touch her but as a silent offering. "Let me help. Not out of pity, but because it's the right thing to do." Valentina looked at his hand, hesitating. "I can't accept it." "Then consider it a loan," he insisted. "You can pay me back when you're able, with interest if that makes you feel better." A small smile touched Valentina's lips. "You're pretty stubborn, you know that?" "I've been told," he replied, returning her smile. In that moment, something shifted between them. They were no longer boss and assistant or even actors in a romantic charade. They were two people seeing each other for the first time, their vulnerabilities exposed. That afternoon, Damien made the transfer while Valentina spoke to her mother on the phone, tears of relief streaming freely down her face. When she hung up, Damien was on the terrace, looking out at the lavender fields stretching to the horizon. "Thank you," she said, standing beside him. "I don't know how—" "Don't say anything," he interrupted her gently. "It's not necessary." They stood in silence, shoulder to shoulder, as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. A bond now existed between them that went beyond words, beyond the contract that had initially brought them together. And though neither said it aloud, they both knew that nothing would be the same after that day. The truth, once revealed, had irreversibly changed the course of their lives. The invitation arrived the next morning, delivered personally by a man on a motorcycle. On cream-colored paper with gold lettering, Mr. and Mrs. Sinclair requested the pleasure of the company of Damien Altamirano and guest for an intimate dinner at their property, Villa Soleil. "The Sinclairs have been family friends for decades," Damien explained as they had breakfast on the terrace. "Philip and my father were at Stanford together before he moved out here. I didn't know they were in Napa this season." Valentina nodded, feeling a sense of unease. A dinner with close family friends meant delving deeper into the charade they had created. But things had changed since her confession. The wall between them had cracked, allowing a glimpse of the human being behind the facade. "Should I buy something suitable for the occasion?" she asked, thinking of her limited wardrobe. "Not necessary," Damien replied. "I know Monica, she'll surely have something you can borrow. She's known for her collection of designer dresses." That afternoon, Valentina discovered that Damien was right. Monica Sinclair, a woman in her 60s with the vitality of someone in her 40s, welcomed her at Villa Soleil as if she were an old friend. "At last we meet the woman who has brought the smile back to our dear Damien," she exclaimed, kissing her on both cheeks. "He's been so somber since that nasty business with Isabel." Valentina smiled uncomfortably, unsure how to respond. Monica led her to a room where several dresses were laid out on the bed. "Choose whichever you like, my dear. We're about the same size." After several tries, Valentina settled on a simple yet elegant emerald green silk dress that enhanced her skin tone and the black of her hair. When she walked down the marble staircase, the conversation in the foyer stopped. Damien, who was talking with Philip next to an ancient sculpture, stood frozen. His eyes swept over Valentina's figure with an admiration he made no attempt to hide. She wore her hair up in a soft bun with a few strands framing her face, and the minimal makeup made her look even more natural. "Splendid," Monica whispered, visibly pleased with her work. "Isn't she, Damien?" He nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "You look beautiful," he finally said, stepping forward to offer her his arm. In that moment, Valentina wasn't faking the blush that colored her cheeks. Dinner was served on a terrace overlooking a small, man-made lake. Floating candles illuminated the water's surface as stars began to appear in the California sky. Besides their hosts, there were two other couples, a renowned Parisian chef and his wife, and a Spanish painter with his French girlfriend. The conversation flowed as easily as the local wine. Valentina, initially reserved, found herself participating animatedly in discussions about art, gastronomy, and the inevitable comparison between life in Europe and the Americas. "New York will always have my heart," she declared, surprising herself with her sincerity. "Napa is wonderful, but I miss the chaos and warmth of my city." "A patriot," Philip commented with approval, "just like our Damien. He's never forgotten his roots, despite his international success." The conversation then turned to more personal topics. The wine had relaxed the atmosphere, and the couples began sharing stories of how they had met. "And you two?" the chef's wife asked, looking at Damien and Valentina with curiosity. "How did you meet?" There was a moment of tension. Valentina felt everyone's eyes on her. "We met at his office," she replied with a restrained smile. I am his assistant." "A workplace romance," Monica exclaimed, delighted. "Always so romantic and complicated. But when did you know she was special?" the painter's girlfriend insisted. "What was that moment when everything changed?" Valentina looked at Damien, unsure how to continue the charade. But to her surprise, it was he who spoke, his voice filled with an emotion that didn't seem feigned. "She came into my life when I had forgotten what it was to trust." The silence that followed his words was profound. It wasn't an extravagant story, or one full of romantic coincidences. It was a simple, powerful truth that resonated with everyone present. Valentina felt her heart race. Was he still acting, or was there truth in that confession? The rest of the evening passed as if in a dream. The laughter, the conversations, the toasts, it all seemed distant, as if she were experiencing it through a veil. She could only think of Damien's words and the look that had accompanied them. It was a look that had stripped away the layers of the billionaire, the boss, the wounded man, and revealed something raw and vulnerable beneath. Close to midnight, they said their goodbyes to their hosts. Monica, with a warmth that felt genuinely maternal, insisted that Valentina keep the emerald dress as a gift, dismissing her protests with a wave of her hand. "It looks far better on you than it ever did on me, my dear," she said, her eyes twinkling. "Consider it a memento from Napa Valley." The walk back to the Lavender Creek estate was short, barely a 10-minute stroll along a gravel path, lit by antique-style lanterns that cast a soft, golden glow. Damien and Valentina walked in a silence that was different from their earlier ones. It wasn't awkward or professional. It was charged, thick with unspoken thoughts and the lingering electricity from the evening. The California night was perfect, with a slight breeze that carried the scent of night-blooming jasmine and the distant rhythmic chirping of crickets. A full moon bathed the landscape in a silvery light, transforming the familiar rows of grapevines and lavender into something magical, almost ethereal. Suddenly Damien stopped. His halt was so abrupt that Valentina took a few more steps before the absence of his presence beside her registered. She turned, her brow furrowed in confusion, the silk of her dress rustling softly in the quiet. "Is something wrong?" He was looking at her with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine, a look that seemed to penetrate her very soul. It was the same look from the dinner table, but magnified by the intimacy of the moonlit path. "What I said at dinner," he began, his voice a low, resonant rumble that was almost swallowed by the night. "About you coming into my life when I had forgotten how to trust. I wasn't acting, Valentina. Not a single word of it was for them." Valentina's breath hitched in her throat. The world seemed to narrow to the space between them, the symphony of the night fading into a distant hum. Damien took a deliberate step toward her, closing half the distance that separated them. "These days with you, they've made me see things I'd forgotten existed," he continued, his voice laced with a sincerity that was utterly disarming. "Your strength, your dignity, the way you face the world without compromise or complaint. You've reminded me what it feels like to truly admire someone, to respect them down to their very core." Another step, and now they were so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the flecks of gold in his amber eyes, illuminated by the moonlight. He smelled of expensive cologne, fine wine, and something uniquely him, a scent she was beginning to associate with a dangerous sense of safety. "If you were really mine, Valentina," he whispered, the words hanging in the air like a sacred vow, "I would never, ever let you go." There was no time for thought, no room for logic or self-preservation. There was only feeling. Responding to an instinct older than reason, Valentina closed the final inch of distance between them and kissed him. It was a soft kiss at first, tentative and questioning, a gentle brushing of lips that spoke of uncertainty and burgeoning hope. But it quickly deepened, transforming into something more profound, more demanding. Damien's hands, which had been hanging uselessly at his sides, found her waist, his fingers splaying across the small of her back. He pulled her against him with a possessive groan, a sound of both surrender and conquest, as if he feared she might dissolve into the moonlight. The world around them disappeared. The vineyards, the moon, the path, it all ceased to exist. There was only the two of them, their lips moving in a frantic, desperate rhythm, their hearts hammering in a synchronized cadence. It was a kiss that held weeks of stolen glances, of suppressed feelings, of half-truths and unspoken desires. It was the release of a tension that had been building since that first strange dinner on the terrace. It was a confession, an apology, and a question all at once. Finally, when the need for air became an undeniable urgency, Valentina pulled back slightly, her chest heaving. Her eyes, shimmering with unshed tears in the moonlight, locked with Damien's. His were dark, with an emotion she couldn't quite name, a potent cocktail of passion, fear, and wonder. "I'm not yours," she whispered, her voice husky, her lips still tingling and swollen from his. She could feel his thumbs gently stroking her back through the thin silk. "Not yet." And with those enigmatic words, a challenge and a promise, she turned and began walking back toward the villa, her steps remarkably steady. She left Damien standing motionless on the path, his fingers touching his own lips, as if to preserve the sensation of the kiss that had just shattered his carefully constructed world. The morning after the kiss dawned with a blinding clarity. The California sun streamed into Valentina's room, painting golden stripes across the lavender-hued walls. She woke early, her mind a tangled web of the previous night's events, the feeling of Damien's lips on hers, the raw vulnerability in his voice, the fierce intensity in his eyes. It all felt like a hyper-realistic dream she had no desire to wake from. For the first time she allowed herself a sliver of hope, a dangerous, fragile thing that she knew could be easily crushed. She dressed simply, jeans and a white linen blouse, and went downstairs. In the sun-drenched kitchen, she made coffee, humming a Natalia Lafourcade song her mother used to sing on Sunday mornings in Queens. For the first time since arriving in Napa, she felt light, untethered, almost happy. The weight of her brother's illness, the pressure of her secret, seemed to have momentarily lifted, replaced by the ghost of Damien's touch. Hector, the estate manager, appeared with a basket of freshly baked croissants, their buttery aroma filling the air. "Good morning, Ms. Guzman. Has Mr. Altamirano come down yet?" "Not yet," she replied, pouring herself a cup of coffee, the dark liquid a stark contrast to her bright mood. "I think he's still sleeping." "Ah, then he doesn't know he has a visitor," Hector commented, beginning to set the breakfast table on the terrace. "She arrived a few minutes ago. I showed her into the main salon." Valentina's heart performed a sickening lurch, plummeting into the pit of her stomach. The fragile bubble of her happiness popped. "A visitor, who?" "A blonde lady, said she was an old friend." "Isabel. It could be no one else." Valentina placed her mug on the countertop with a soft click, her hands suddenly clammy. A cold dread washed over her. She did not want to be present when Damien encountered his ex-fiancée. It was too personal, too intimate, a chapter of his life she had no right to witness, especially not now. The memory of last night's kiss felt tainted, naive. "I'm going for a walk in the gardens," she announced, her voice strained as she moved quickly toward the back door, needing to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the house. The estate's gardens stretched out in descending terraces, leading to a small pond surrounded by weeping willows. Valentina walked without a destination, her feet carrying her along winding stone paths, past rose bushes and olive groves. She tried not to think about what might be happening inside the villa, but it was a futile effort. Her mind became a torture chamber, replaying vivid images of Isabel, beautiful, sophisticated, clad in designer white, effortlessly winning Damien back with a few well-chosen words and a tearful smile. "It's not my business," she reminded herself firmly, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "This is a job. This isn't a real romance." But the memory of the kiss, of his whispered confession under the moon, screamed otherwise. It had felt real, dangerously real. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely only half an hour, she decided to head back. Perhaps Isabel had already left. As she approached the house via a path lined with olive trees, she heard voices drifting from a side terrace, shielded from the main garden by a row of tall cypress trees. She froze, instinctively stepping behind the dense foliage of one of the trees, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Isabel was seated in one of the wrought-iron chairs, looking as elegant as ever in a pristine white sundress that accentuated her golden tan. Across from her, Damien stood, his posture rigid, the tension evident in every line of his body. He was a fortress of coiled anger. "It was a mistake, Damien," Isabel was saying, her voice thick with practiced emotion. "The worst mistake of my life. Not a day goes by that I don't regret it. Regret what exactly, Isabel? Damien's voice was glacial, devoid of any warmth. Cheating on me or getting caught? Isabel rose gracefully and moved toward him, a predator cloaked in contrition. She placed a manicured hand on his arm, a gesture of familiar intimacy that sent a sharp, unexpected pang of pain through Valentina's chest. "Regret hurting you," she answered, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Regret confusing a fleeting thrill with true love. Robert and I, that was never real. It was a symptom of my own insecurity. But you and me, what we had, that was real, Damien. You know it was. Damien took a half step back, shrugging off her touch as if it were a physical irritant. "And what now, Isabel? You expect me to just forget everything and we can pick up where we left off?" "Yes." The sincerity in her voice was chillingly convincing. "I know it sounds crazy, but I never stopped loving you, not for a second, and I know you haven't stopped loving me either. People like us, we don't just move on." Valentina couldn't listen anymore. The words were poison, seeping into the fragile hope she had allowed to bloom. She backed away silently, her feet moving mechanically over the gravel path, and re-entered the house through the main entrance. Once inside her room, she closed the door and sank onto the edge of the bed, her hands trembling uncontrollably. "Stupid," she berated herself, the word a harsh whisper in the silent room. "How could you be so stupid? How could you possibly think a man like him, a man from that world, would ever truly see you?" The kiss, which had felt like a beginning just hours ago, now felt like a cruel deception, a final act in his revenge play. The hours crawled by. Valentina remained a prisoner in her room, claiming a migraine when Hector knocked to ask if she would be down for lunch. She couldn't face Damien. She couldn't look at him without seeing Isabel's hand on his arm, without hearing Isabel's confident assertion of their unbreakable bond. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and purple, she finally decided to emerge. She couldn't hide forever. She needed answers. She needed to know where she stood, even if the truth was going to shatter her. She found Damien in the library, a grand wood-paneled room filled with the scent of old books and leather. He was staring at his laptop, though he didn't seem to be working. He looked tired, worn down, and profoundly troubled. He looked up the moment she entered, and for a fleeting instant, something in his eyes, relief, hope, lit up. "I missed you at lunch," he said, closing the laptop with a soft click. "Hector mentioned you weren't feeling well." Valentina remained by the door, a safe distance away, as if fearing the gravitational pull that always seemed to exist between them. "I saw Isabel today," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "I heard you talking on the terrace." Damien's expression hardened, his brief moment of warmth vanishing. "It wasn't a pleasant conversation. She wants to get back together with you." It wasn't a question, but a painful statement of fact. He rose from his chair, circling the large mahogany desk to stand closer to her. He stopped a few feet away, sensing the fragile wall she had erected between them. "Isabel always wants what she can't have. It's a game to her. Do you still have feelings for her?" The question hung in the air between them like a dark, heavy cloud. Valentina had asked it not out of jealousy, but from a place of quiet dignity that demanded the truth. She would not be a consolation prize. She would not be a tool for revenge. She had too much self-respect for that. Damien looked taken aback by her directness. He opened his mouth to respond, a swift denial seemingly on his lips, but then he hesitated. It was a minuscule pause, a flicker of an instant, but in the suffocating silence of the library it was a lifetime. In that moment of hesitation, his mind wasn't on Isabel. It was on the terrifying, uncharted territory of his feelings for the woman standing before him. To deny Isabel was to admit Valentina, and the magnitude of that admission paralyzed him. But all Valentina saw was the pause. The silence stretched, growing heavier, more damning with every passing second. She felt something inside her crack, that fragile, foolish hope she'd nurtured since the night before, shattering into a million irreparable pieces. "I understand," she said finally, her voice perfectly controlled, betraying none of the devastation raging within her. "Thank you for your honesty." Before Damien could find his voice, before he could explain the true meaning of his silence, she had turned and walked out of the library, leaving him in a silence of his own making. That night, as the villa slept under a blanket of stars, Valentina meticulously packed her belongings. She arranged for a car service to pick her up at 5 in the morning and booked a one-way flight from San Francisco to New York. It was time to go home. It was time to face reality. On the nightstand, she left a white envelope. Inside, a brief note written in her neat, precise script. Damien, thank you for your generosity with Nicholas. The transfer arrived on time, and his surgery is scheduled for this coming Monday. I will never forget what you've done for my family. As for us, I think this is for the best. Some wounds need time to heal completely. Please don't contact me. I will submit my formal resignation when I get back to New York. Take care, Valentina. She took one last look around the room that had been her sanctuary and her prison for the past few weeks, breathing in the scent of lavender one last time, committing it to memory. Then, with a mixture of resolute determination and profound sadness, she quietly closed the door behind her. The car was waiting at the end of the cypress-lined drive. She got in without a backward glance, fighting the lump in her throat and the tears that burned behind her eyes. At 8 in the morning, Damien woke with a disquieting sense of dread. Something was wrong. The air in the villa felt different, emptier. He dressed hurriedly and went straight to Valentina's room. He knocked softly, calling her name. When met with silence, a cold fear gripped him. He turned the knob and pushed the door open. The room was immaculate, devoid of any human presence. The bed was perfectly made, the closet door ajar revealing empty hangers, and a single white envelope rested on the nightstand, a stark beacon in the morning light. He read the note once, twice, a third time, as if the words might rearrange themselves into a different meaning. A sharp physical pain bloomed in his chest, an emptiness more profound than anything he had felt, even when he discovered Isabel's betrayal. This was a loss of a different magnitude. He sank onto her bed, the bed where he had knelt to tend to her ankle, and picked up the pillow, clutching it in his hands. Her scent, lavender mixed with the subtle, clean fragrance of her shampoo, enveloped him like a ghostly embrace. In that moment, the full weight of his catastrophic mistake crashed down on him. His hesitation hadn't been about Isabel. It had been about his own terror, the terror of admitting how much Valentina had come to mean to him in such a short time. He had been a coward. He had made the worst mistake of his life, and he had no idea if he would ever get the chance to fix it. The private jet landed at Teterboro under a fine, persistent drizzle. New York City greeted Damien with a sky the color of slate, a perfect reflection of his mood. During the flight from California, he had reread Valentina's note until the paper was soft and creased, torturing himself with each elegantly penned word. His Fifth Avenue penthouse, usually a symbol of his success, felt like a vast, crushing tomb. The staff moved like ghosts, their discretion a testament to their training. The news that Miss Guzman would not be returning had spread through the household with unspoken speed. "Shall I prepare your schedule for tomorrow, sir?" asked Mrs. Gable, the unflappable housekeeper, her voice barely above a whisper. "No," Damien replied without looking at her, his voice flat. "Cancel my appointments for the week." The days that followed blurred into a grey haze of overwork and sleepless nights. Damien buried himself in his office, constructing a fortress of spreadsheets, legal documents, and endless video conferences. He made ruthless, brilliant business decisions that would have once thrilled him, but now they felt like ashes in his mouth. Nothing worked. Valentina's absence was a tangible presence, a phantom haunting the sleek, sterile corridors of Altamirano Tech. Her empty desk outside his office, which no one dared to touch, was a constant reproach. The silent intercom, the perfectly organized files he could no longer find, the coffee that was never quite right. It was all a monument to her. A week after his return, a nervous temp named Charlotte, who was hopelessly out of her depth, timidly entered his office. "Mr. Altamirano, Human Resources needs to know if they should process Ms. Guzman's resignation letter." Damien looked up from his laptop, his face an impassive mask except for a muscle twitching in his jaw. "Tell them to file it. I'll let them know when a permanent replacement has been found." The moment Charlotte scurried out, he picked up his phone and dialed Valentina's number for what must have been the 20th time. It went straight to voicemail, as always. He didn't leave a message. What could he say that wouldn't sound like a pathetic excuse? That night, alone in his penthouse, Damien opened a bottle of añejo tequila he kept for special occasions. As the amber liquid burned a trail down his throat, he scrolled idly through old emails on his laptop, searching for a distraction. And then he found it, a photo from the company Christmas party the previous year. Valentina was standing in a corner, smiling shyly at the camera. She wore a simple black dress, and for the first and only time he'd ever seen it, her hair was down, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She looked breathtaking. Something inside him shattered. The dam of emotion he had carefully constructed for weeks finally broke. Tears, hot and stinging, streamed down his face. They weren't tears of anger or frustration, but of a profound, aching nostalgia that was a physical pain. He missed her voice. He missed her calming presence. He missed the way she anticipated his needs before he even knew them himself. But most of all, he missed the woman he'd gotten to know in Napa Valley. The strong, dignified, fiercely loving woman who would sacrifice anything for her family. The next morning, with dark circles under his eyes and a new, steely resolve, Damien summoned his head of security. "I need Valentina Guzman's current home address." The man, a professional accustomed to executing commands without question, simply nodded. "You'll have it this afternoon, sir." It turned out Valentina was exactly where she said she would be, back in New York. The report detailed a modest apartment in a pre-war building in Queens, the same neighborhood she had grown up in. It also noted her daily visits to Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, where her brother was a patient. Damien didn't hesitate. That evening, his driver took him across the Queensboro Bridge, away from the sterile opulence of Manhattan and into the vibrant, chaotic heart of the borough. The city that had once felt like his kingdom now felt like a foreign land. The car pulled up in front of a 1940s brick building with small balconies adorned with potted plants. According to the report, Valentina lived on the third floor, apartment 3B. He stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, the expensive fabric of his suit feeling utterly out of place. What would he say? How could he possibly explain that his silence, his damning hesitation, meant the exact opposite of what she had interpreted? How could he make her understand that he had been a coward, terrified not because he still loved Isabel, but because he was falling hard and fast for her? Deciding a frontal assault was the wrong approach, he found a seat on the building's front stoop. He would wait. He would wait, as long as it took. Nearly 4 hours later, as the streetlights flickered on, he saw her walking down the block. She wore jeans and a simple blouse, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked exhausted, but there was a serene strength in her posture that he had always admired. When she saw him sitting there, she stopped dead, her steps faltering. A paper grocery bag she was carrying nearly slipped from her grasp. "Damien!" Her voice was a faint whisper, laced with disbelief and something else, wariness. "What are you doing here?" He stood up slowly, cautiously, as if approaching a frightened animal. "I needed to see you." Valentina's composure returned in an instant, her expression hardening into the professional mask he knew so well. "I believe my note was perfectly clear. We have nothing to talk about." She tried to brush past him to enter the building, but he gently moved to block her path. "Please," he said, and the raw humility in his voice was something she had never heard before. "Just let me tell you what I felt when you left. That's all I ask." Something in his tone, in the desperate vulnerability in his eyes, made her pause. She took a deep, steadying breath. 5 minutes, she conceded, not 1 second more. They rode the small, rattling elevator up in silence. Her apartment was small but cozy, filled with books stacked on every available surface and walls covered in family photos. She set her grocery bag on the kitchen counter and turned to face him, crossing her arms in a defensive posture. "I'm listening." Damien hadn't prepared a speech. The words came from a place deep inside him that he had kept locked away for years. "When I read your note," he began, his voice hoarse, "I felt like something vital had been ripped out of me. The days since have been a living hell. I tried to work, to eat, to sleep, but nothing made sense. The world kept spinning, but I was frozen in that moment in the library when you asked me if I still had feelings for Isabel." He paused, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of nervous agitation. "My silence. It wasn't because I still love her. It was because in that exact second I realized I felt absolutely nothing for her. Not love, not hate, not even resentment. Just nothing. And that terrified me." Valentina stared at him, her expression unreadable, but he noticed her hands were no longer gripping her arms so tightly. "Why did it terrify you?" "Because it meant something else. Something much stronger had taken that space," he answered, taking a tentative step closer. "You, your strength, your dignity, your selfless heart. I fell in love with you in Napa Valley, Valentina. Not with the perfect assistant, but with the woman I saw when all the masks came off. The words hung in the air between them, fragile and luminous. For the first time, Valentina saw the real man behind the powerful billionaire, vulnerable, flawed, and afraid. "How is Nicholas?" he asked softly, the abrupt change in topic catching her off guard. "He's better," she replied, her voice softening. "The surgery was a success. The doctors say he'll be able to go to college next semester." A genuine smile, the first she had seen on his face in weeks, transformed his features. "I'm so glad. He's a lucky kid to have you as a sister." Valentina felt her defenses beginning to crumble. This man, standing in her living room with tired eyes and several days' worth of stubble, was someone she had never met before. He wasn't the arrogant millionaire, the demanding boss, or even the wounded man from Napa. He was just Damien. "I don't know if I can trust this," she admitted finally, her voice barely a whisper. "Trust you. Trust us." "I know," he replied instantly. "And I'm not asking you to. Not right away. I'm just asking for a chance to prove to you that what we had in Napa wasn't an act, at least not at the end." Their eyes met across the small Queen's apartment, a world away from the vineyards of Napa and the elegant avenues of Manhattan, and in that moment, without any more words needed, something in both of them began to heal. 3 days had passed since that fraught encounter in Valentina's apartment. 3 days in which Damien had returned to a suite at the Carlisle Hotel, but not to his old life. Something held him in the city, a quiet determination that solidified with each passing hour. Valentina had asked for time to think, to process his words, to decide if she was willing to grant him the one thing he had never had to ask for before, a chance. And Damien was prepared to wait, but not passively. He spent his days rediscovering the city, not as a conqueror from a glass tower, but as a resident. He walked through Central Park, visited the Met, and found himself in Queens, exploring the vibrant neighborhoods he only knew from a map. The city, chaotic and alive, reconnected him to a part of himself he had lost somewhere between board meetings and balance sheets. One morning, while drinking coffee at a small cafe, an idea began to take shape. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Santi, it's Damien Altamirano. I need a favor." Santino Mendoza, his old college roommate and now one of New York's most sought-after event planners, didn't hide his shock. "Damien, holy hell, man. Is that really you? Where have you been hiding?" The conversation flowed with an ease that only true friendship allows. When Damien explained what he needed, Santi let out an impressed whistle. Her black-tie charity gala to raise funds for pediatric leukemia treatments for underprivileged families at the Temple of Dendur? In less than a week? You're certifiably insane, my friend, but I've always loved an impossible challenge. For the next 5 days, Damien worked with a singular, ferocious focus. He leveraged his entire network, calling in favors from titans of industry, finance, and technology. Santino, true to his word, mobilized celebrities, artists, and New York's philanthropic elite. The goal was audacious: to organize the city's most successful fundraising gala of the year, with every single dollar raised going to a new foundation established to cover treatment costs for families at Sloan Kettering and other city hospitals. The night of the event, the ancient Egyptian temple housed within the Metropolitan Museum of Art was transformed into a magical space. Soft uplighting illuminated the sandstone walls, and the reflecting pool shimmered with the light of 1,000 floating candles. The guest list was a who's who of New York society. Damien, impeccable in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo, greeted each guest personally, but his eyes constantly scanned the crowd, a futile hope in his heart. Even though he knew she wouldn't be there, he hadn't invited her. This wasn't about putting her on display. It was about showing her who he could be. During dinner, he took the stage. His speech was brief but powerful. He spoke not of numbers or corporate responsibility, but of how life sometimes forces us to see the world through someone else's pain, and how true wealth is measured not by what you accumulate, but by what you can give away. "Tonight is not about us," he concluded, his voice resonating with an intensity that stunned the audience. "It's about the kids in hospital beds just a few miles from here. It's about the families who sacrifice everything for a chance at a cure they can't afford. It's about remembering that at the end of the day, the only thing that truly matters is the love we are willing to fight for." The applause was thunderous. Donations poured in. far exceeding even the most optimistic projections. CEOs known for their ruthless business practices pledged staggering sums, moved by the raw passion of a man they had only known as cold and calculating. The event was being broadcast live on a local news channel. In a small apartment in Queens, Valentina watched the screen, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. Nicholas, sitting beside her on the sofa, still weak but clearly on the mend, took her hand. "That's for you, isn't it?" the teenager asked with a wisdom far beyond his years. "He's doing all of this for you." Valentina couldn't speak. She could only nod, her heart a tangled mess of disbelief, hope, and overwhelming emotion. The next morning, Damien woke to his phone ringing. It was Santi. "We did it, man! We cleared over $5 million. It's a new record for a first-time gala in this city." Damien smiled, exhausted but deeply satisfied. After thanking his friend, he made a call to his bank and gave a precise set of instructions. 2 hours later, he was standing in front of the brick building in Queens once more. In his hands, he held a single manila envelope. When Valentina opened the door, their eyes met in a silence thick with everything left unsaid. Without a word, Damien held out the envelope. "What is this?" she asked, not taking it. "Open it." With trembling hands, Valentina pulled out the documents. It was the official charter for the Nicholas Guzman Foundation and a certified receipt for the transfer of the evening's proceeds into its newly established account. The sum took her breath away. "This is," she started, unable to finish. "It's not charity," Damien said quickly, his voice thick with emotion. "It's the very least I could do, after everything you've done for me, everything you've taught me." The tears that had been threatening finally fell. They weren't tears of sadness or even just gratitude. They were tears of recognition, of finally seeing the complete man who had been hidden behind layers of pain and pride. "I saw you last night," she confessed. "On TV, what you said. Every word was for you," he answered. Even if no one else knew it. Unable to hold back any longer, Valentina stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his chest. Damien's arms enveloped her, holding her as if he was afraid she'd disappear again. They stood there, clinging to each other in the narrow hallway. In that embrace was forgiveness, promise, and the tentative beginnings of a future. When they finally separated, she looked up at him, her eyes searching his. "How do I know this isn't just part of another plan?" she asked, voicing her last deepest fear. "That this isn't just another grand strategy?" Damien cupped her face in his hands, his touch impossibly gentle. "Because, for the first time in my life," he answered, his voice breaking with emotion, "I don't have a plan, I just have you. And if you'll let me, I want to spend every day for the rest of my life proving to you that that's enough. More than enough." Valentina closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her like a promise. When she opened them again, her decision was made. It wouldn't be easy. They both had scars, fears, and worlds to reconcile. But here, in this humble hallway in Queens, something new and real was beginning. "Come in," she said, taking his hand and leading him inside. "Nicholas wants to meet the man who organized the party he hasn't stopped talking about all morning." And as they crossed the threshold together, Damien and Valentina both knew they weren't just entering an apartment. They were stepping into a life that was just beginning to be written, on clean pages, with no more charades, no more revenge, and no plan other than the love that was finally gloriously blooming between them. 6 months had passed since that morning in Queens. 6 months of careful reconstruction, of patient learning, of rediscovering each other without masks or pretense. Life had found a new harmonious rhythm. Damien now split his time between New York and his international offices, having restructured his entire company to allow for more remote work. Valentina had accepted a new role, not as his assistant, but as the executive director of the Altamirano Foundation, the official, expanded successor to the fund he'd created. Nicholas was recovering with the resilient strength of a 17-year-old, his future bright. He was already talking about starting pre-med courses at Columbia, inspired by the doctors who had saved his life. It was Damien's idea to return to Napa Valley in July, when the lavender fields would be at their peak. "It's time to rewrite our memories there," he had said one night, as they shared dinner on the small balcony of the new, larger apartment they now shared in Brooklyn. And so they found themselves back at the Lavender Creek estate, under the same roof, but with entirely different hearts. Hector greeted them at the door with a knowing, conspiratorial smile. The estate staff had been quietly informed that this time there would be no need for separate rooms. The first few hours were strange, almost surreal. Every corner held a memory of the days they were pretending to be something they weren't, only to stumble into what they could become. "This is where I sprained my ankle," Valentina commented, pointing to the spot on the path through the lavender fields as they strolled on their first afternoon. Damien laced his fingers through hers. "I think that was the moment I knew I was in serious trouble," he confessed with a smile. "When I carried you in my arms and realized how perfectly you fit." Valentina leaned her head against his shoulder, breathing in the heady scent of lavender mixed with Damien's cologne, a combination that now simply smelled like home. Dusk found them on the terrace, sipping rosé and talking with an ease that had once been impossible. There were no more awkward silences or forbidden topics. They talked about their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. They talked about how Isabel's betrayal had shattered Damien's heart, until a quiet assistant with deep eyes and unwavering principles had kicked the door down. The next morning, Damien rose early, leaving Valentina sleeping peacefully. He had preparations to make. When she awoke, she found a note on the pillow beside her. "Put on something comfortable and meet me at the entrance at 11. I have a surprise for you. D." Intrigued, Valentina chose a simple white cotton sundress and flat sandals. At 11 o'clock sharp, Damien was waiting for her with a picnic basket and the smile that still made her heart skip a beat. They walked to the clearing in the lavender field. They both recognized instantly the exact spot where she had fallen. But today, instead of treacherous roots, a blanket was spread on the grass laden with cushions, fresh fruit, local cheeses, and a bottle of champagne chilling in an ice bucket. "It's perfect," Valentina breathed, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. They sat and enjoyed the feast, simply reveling in each other's company under the warm California sun. At one point, as Valentina was watching a butterfly dance over the purple blossoms, she turned back to Damien and found he was no longer sitting across from her. He was on one knee. In his hand was a small, velvet box. "Valentina," he began, his voice surprisingly steady. "When I first came to Napa, I was looking for revenge. The second time we were supposed to come, I was looking for forgiveness. Today, I'm here looking for a future. Our future." He opened the box, revealing a platinum ring with a stunning solitaire diamond, flanked by small deep blue stones. "They're sapphires," he explained, "the exact color of these fields at sunset, so we'll never forget where our real story began." Tears blurred Valentina's vision. "This time it's not a disguise, it's not an act," Damien continued, his voice thick with emotion. "This is real as what I feel for you. Valentina Guzman, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me between New York and California, between your world and mine, until they become one?" Overwhelmed, Valentina launched herself into his arms. "Yes," she whispered through tears and laughter. "Yes, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. And there, kneeling together in a sea of purple, they kissed, a kiss that tasted of champagne, sunshine, and the promise of a lifetime. "I love you," Damien murmured against her lips. "I think I loved you even before I knew what it was." "And I love you," she answered. "I think I loved you even when I was pretending to be just your efficient assistant." They stayed there, wrapped in each other's arms, until the sun began to dip below the horizon. As they walked back to the villa hand in hand, the ring sparkling on Valentina's finger, they both knew they had found what they weren't even looking for, a love that demanded nothing, but changed everything. 3 years later, the afternoon sun filtered through the large bay windows of a classic brownstone in Park Slope, Brooklyn. In the lush backyard, under the shade of an old maple tree, a small family party was in full swing. Nicholas, now a confident 20-year-old in his second year at Columbia's pre-med program, was animatedly explaining a complex biological process to Philip and Monica Sinclair, who had flown in from Napa for the occasion. His complete recovery was a constant, joyful miracle. Valentina's mother, her face beaming with pride, presided over a table laden with a feast that blended two cultures. Her famous tamales and chilaquiles, which Damien now craved, sat alongside artisanal cheeses and pastries from a local Brooklyn bakery. In a quieter corner of the garden, Valentina Altamirano sat in a wooden rocking chair, a baby girl of 8 months sleeping peacefully in her arms. Lucia, named for Damien's beloved grandmother, had her father's golden skin and her mother's expressive dark eyes. "Do the most beautiful girls in the world need anything?" Damien asked, approaching with 2 steaming mugs of lavender tea, a tradition they had kept since Napa. Valentina smiled, a smile reserved only for him, full of love and shared history. "Just for you to sit with us for a minute," she replied. "It's your birthday, and you've been playing host instead of letting us celebrate you." Damien settled into the chair beside her, his gaze soft as he looked at his wife and daughter. Even now, there were moments he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. "What are you thinking about?" Valentina asked, knowing that contemplative look. "About how all of this started," he confessed, taking her free hand. "How a miserable, petty plan to make Isabel jealous ended up being the best thing that ever happened to me." They laughed softly, careful not to wake Lucia. The Altamirano Foundation, under Valentina's leadership, had become one of the most respected philanthropic organizations in the city. Damien, meanwhile, had found a new sense of purpose, redirecting his tech empire toward projects with significant social impact. "Remember that first night in Napa," Valentina mused. "How we were pretending, measuring every word. And look at us now," he said, gently stroking his daughter's head. "No more disguises." Lucia stirred in her sleep, her tiny hand grabbing the necklace Valentina wore, a delicate silver pendant in the shape of a lavender sprig, Damien's first anniversary gift. Across the garden, Valentina's family, who had once been wary of the billionaire courting their daughter, now embraced him as one of their own. He had not pulled Valentina into his world of glass towers. Instead, he had built a new world with her, one that honored both of their roots. "Your mother told me she's thinking of opening a restaurant," Damien commented. "Seriously? That's been her dream forever." "I told her we could help her find the perfect spot. That corner in Carroll Gardens we saw last week might be ideal." Valentina looked at him with pure adoration. The man who had once been blinded by revenge now found his greatest joy in the happiness of their family. "You know what's the most amazing part of all this?" she said after a moment. "It all started with a lie, a complete charade, and it turned into the most real and authentic thing I've ever known." Damien leaned over and kissed her, a soft, lingering kiss full of promises kept and a future yet to unfold. "Life has a pretty strange sense of humor," he replied. "But I wouldn't change a single thing, not even those agonizing days when I thought I had lost you forever." The party continued around them, a joyful melody of laughter and conversation. As their friends and family gathered to sing Happy Birthday, with Lucia now awake and giggling in her mother's arms, Damien and Valentina exchanged a look that said everything. They had found their home, not in a place, but in each other. And every year when the lavender bloomed, they returned to Napa, not to remember the charade, but to celebrate the profound truth they had found, that sometimes the most tangled paths lead us exactly where we need to be.